Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Real Estate Lab. Happy Friday. I just want to apologize. I am in my car. The Texas heat is something to consider whenever you're doing anything. So I have to do it in my car. I think my laptop fried from the heat. But if you're listening in on Spotify, on Google, Apple Podcasts, anything like that, thank you. And let's go around the room and do introductions. I go by Ian of Austin everywhere on the internet. And we have a fun show for you today. So let's start with Miss Liberty.
What's up, everybody? Liberty here with Realty Austin. And I am so excited about today's episode. We're going to be talking about home insurance and all of what that entails. So let's get it.
Love it.
What's up, Real Estate Lab viewers? JJ Tolentino with the Next Level Property Group at KW Realty. Ready to talk about insurance. Speaking of which, we have Sam Merchant here with Goosehead.
What's up, guys? Sam Merchant, Goosehead Insurance, the merchant agency. We're here to fill you in on all things insurance, all things make sure your home's all ready to go, and really happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Heck yeah. And make sure that if anybody has any questions, please put them in the comments, because home insurance is one of those things that I'm going to say is undervalued and sometimes misunderstood during the home buying process, especially when it comes to new construction versus resale versus, umbrella policies versus if you're leasing, if it's an investment, if it's short-term rental. So we have all those questions to talk to Sam about today. So why don't Cooler Alaska? I saw, let's see. Can you see that? Yeah, you can.
Hey.
Hello, Alaska. Cooler Alaska.
It is. It is a little cooler there. It's 100 degrees. At least it's 97 degrees. Feels like 100 and something here in Austin, Texas. So fortunately, we have air conditioning most of the time. So who wants to take the first question? Ask Sam.
Yeah, so I will just scoop it right off the plate here and start off by asking Sam, whenever I am talking to my clients about when and where they need to get home insurance, where should I send them? Should I send them to a big box company, local? What's the difference? And does it matter?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Liberty. So we'll kind of back that up. We'll back that question up a little bit. So when you're thinking about home insurance, the first thing I want to say is you guys really want to look at a brokerage. So you have independent companies. So, your Farmers, your State Farms of the world. You have and those companies will typically really just push one product. So they have like one home insurance product, and they'll pretty much tell you and try to fit you in that bucket as best as they can. Usually it's kind of cookie cutter. So it is customizable, but they'll kind of really just push one piece on you and then tell you that that's the best fit. Most of the times it's not. With brokers are good. Brokers, so like with Goosehead Insurance, we'll shop you with now we're about 40 plus companies, and we're still getting new companies all the time. And really see, I think a lot of people tend to look at, well, this is the best rate, so this is what I need. But I think it's also important to look what's the best company for your specific type of house, as you're making, renovations and things like that. Make sure everything's covered properly. And kind of the way to go about doing that. So, and then on your, bottom of the spectrum is your Geico's. That gecko is all over the internet. And that gecko may save you, like 15%, but typically that's going to result in like some reduced coverages and things that may really make it no use in having insurance in the first place, right? So definitely you want to go with the broker. Shop local. right? Local insurance agents typically will know the market a little bit better, and really know kind of like the advancements that are happening in each region. So I think that's really, really important as well. And then don't be afraid to call. I think a lot of people are like really scared. They're like, let me just find some random person online and hope they can answer your questions. Typically they can, but it's in their best interest to work with you for 5 minutes, move on, never talk to you again. And on our side, all of our clients are pretty much our friends at this point. And we really try to go above and beyond to make sure that, if you ever need anything, sometimes even I had a client call me this morning. They said, oh, I just added a new patio to my house. Can you give me a quick call? So we want to make sure that, hey, your insurance policy is going to cover that addition, right? Because if it's not covered, something happens, we definitely don't want you to pay out of pocket, for that piece too. So really good.
That's so interesting. I did not know that different parts, like the fence, is that covered? Like I need to call my agent right away and ask them.
Well, that's huge. Yeah. Especially if you're adding on, or like you had mentioned, Sam, renovation projects. So here's what I want to ask, because I think a lot of people have this question. Can you give me a ballpark moderate coverage for a brand new home built in, let's say 2020 or 2021, let's say 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2,000 square feet? Like, is there any way you can give a quick, here's approximately what people are paying, just so people get an understanding of what some of these costs are in Austin? Obviously, everyone's situation is a little different.
Yeah. Just a ballpark. So, typically the coverage amount you're looking for, let's say 2,000 square foot house. Typically, and most of our carriers are like this too. We'll look at $100 to $125 a square foot for coverage. Usually 100 is more than enough, but let's say the 3x2 is like super custom inside. Typically they're not. But if it was, maybe 110 to 125 a square foot, but let's stick with 100. So 100 times, 2K, that puts you at 200,000 in coverage. Okay. And then as you kind of walk down the policy, I'm going to tie it back to what Liberty asked about that fence. That's a really, really good question. So typically the fence is going to be covered underneath other structures. So that piece is usually going to be like 10% of that coverage amount. So that coverage A is that replacement cost, pretty much what Ian hit on the nail, like how much coverage do I need? And then that B piece will cover that fence.
So let's say it was like 300,000 in coverage.
Yeah.
Right. So what kind of premium are we talking about for that? Just again, we know that this is just a ballpark.
Yeah, just a ballpark. Typically, you're looking at around $1,000 to $1,200 for the year.
That's exactly what I was looking for. And the reason why is because we get people calling us all the time. They're like, "Hey, how much do I have to budget in for homeowners insurance?" Because people don't think about that. Homeowners insurance, taxes, and then your utilities. Well, the insurance is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Or PITI.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're financing a home, when you're getting into a home and you're choosing financing, that insurance is going to be required by the lender, and they will escrow that amount, I believe, Ian. And so
is the term.
If you're paying cash, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but is home insurance required law in Texas?
So great question. So it's not. So a lot of cash investors typically do tend to opt towards getting insurance, especially you're protecting an asset that you purchased, and a lot of them see it that way because you're paying 300, 400, 500K plus to purchase something, and they just want to make sure that it's covered the right way if something does happen. Now we do get every once in a while, someone that's like, hey, I just paid cash. If anything happens to it, I'm just going to rebuild it myself. And I'm actually a general contractor. I had that happen last week. So that's cool. Like if you're actually the GC, then, you probably know the cost it takes to rebuild a house, even in more, granularity than we do. So there are those outliers, but I would say the majority of people typically, do look at having that. And they're very comfortable paying for it too, because it's not, a huge percentage component compared to the house that they bought themselves.
Yeah. I'd also like to point out we've done a podcast on title insurance. This is completely different.
Yeah.
This is home insurance for insuring the property itself, the physical
Insuring the building.
property itself.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because a lot of people, I think, always want to know the difference between, insuring the property and then insuring the land. And those are two separate things. So you never want, like the flip side of the question we talked about earlier, how much coverage do you need? It's funny because a lot of times we come across things that have, and that's not a good thing, but they'll have like too much coverage. So they're actually paying extra for something that they never needed in the first place, which is
I have a good example of this. So I had a client who was a little bit of a worrier, and if you're watching, I love you. You know who you are. And when she was getting her insurance on her home, she added a bunch of these riders to have that extra coverage, and each one, it added on to the cost of that monthly premium. And she added so many riders to her policy that the lender was like, okay, now your debt to income ratio is set off, and like you may not qualify for this house anymore. So we really had to do some adjusting there at the end of the wire to get that taken off and readjusted for her.
And that's like a really, that's really interesting that happens, because I think with insurance, a lot of people, they hear things that they hear what they want to hear, and then they kind of just start going with it.
That's with everything. That's with real estate too. That happens.
Yeah.
So how do you consult with that? Like someone's like, let's just get flood insurance, even though there wasn't floods here. Let's get, earthquake insurance. Like, how do you talk people through some of these things?
That's awesome. I talk about that almost every day at this point. So let's start with flood, right? So flood insurance, you have private flood carriers. So like, for example, like one of our really competitive carriers, give them a little shout out here, Neptune Flood, write them a lot. And then there's your kind of larger insurance companies that have their own products. So like Progressive through American Strategic Insurance, they write a really competitive flood product here as well. So typically we'll look at, the first thing we want to do is we want to look at what flood zone they're in. Because there's different, low risk, high risk flood zones. We want to see, hey, where are you at? How common is it? And then, typically based on their appetite, like some people will say, hey, I'm in like a zone X is going to be like a standard, like especially here in Austin, most homes are going to be zone X. Whereas if you go kind of towards like Houston, you'll see like zone AE. Those are like the higher risk zones.
We have those here. We do, along creek beds and such.
Along the creeks and stuff, yeah.
Let's see.
So we really just kind of want to see, like what zone they're in. And then from there, we'll see, okay, what is the best option, whether we're looking at, a private flood carrier. And sometimes like those are really competitive. Other times your big box kind of companies like Progressive will have really competitive rates as well. So flood, super important. Most people should have it. If you don't, it's definitely worth it, especially what we have happen here in Texas a lot. And then, I
don't think people see it. I don't think people know this, but there are a lot of places in southeast Austin, and then like in Pflugerville that have flood requirements. Even some places in Round Rock along Brushy Creek or Forest Creek. Yeah, anything that backs up to some water.
That should be a sign.
Look, Ian, if you can, I've shared my screen here. You can pop over to me. I've pulled up the MLS with some different flood zones.
Oh, Liberty.
Oh, there we go.
It's because I'm on my phone. Hold on.
Okay.
There we go. I got it.
Okay, so here we are. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see, because when we start talking about floods here, I'm inclined to just come in here and show you Onion Creek, southeast.
Yeah, perfect example. Onion Creek. It's a super hot. They're building a new development here, and so they're like revitalizing the area considerably. And they
are, but I wanted to show Sam, because if you see here, the AE zone, I mean, is that a no-go zone? Like, what does that mean to you? And this listing that I pulled up is in an X zone. So is that
What does AE stand for?
Well, X is good.
X is good?
Yeah, X is going to be like your standard flood zone. So those are typically areas where floods don't occur as much, and like it's based off the floodplains. And then AE is a high risk zone. So those are typically going to be areas where there's been more flooding that's occurred in the past, 50 plus years.
And if you can see here, there's quite a few streets that are in that AE zone.
Well, that's because that section is in a valley, right? Of Onion Creek, it's down below. I don't know if it's below sea level, but we have a lot of topography here, and so wherever there's a dip in the ground, obviously that's where you can potentially have some irrigation issues or flooding. Austin wasn't built with the thought of let's not have water running.
I looked it up. It doesn't even say what it means. I mean, it has all these years and stuff, but I was thinking almost elevated.
Yeah. Well, isn't that partial though? So like AE is a partial. Anyway, I don't want to spend the whole episode talking about just floods because I don't want to scare people either. It's not a high percentage of homes that need flood insurance, but what would you guess, Sam? Like just give me a quote. Would you say 10%?
It says AE flood zones are areas that presents a 1% annual chance of flooding, 26% chance over the life of a 30-year mortgage.
Yeah, so 26% chance. But how many homes that you see come through actually need homeowners insurance? My guess is going to be flood insurance for their homeowners. I would guess 10%.
Like 8. Yeah, like maybe like 8 to 10%. Okay. Like it's not super common. Whereas like, let's say about
26% over 30 years. That's
still a quarter of the life of the loan.
It's still
You have to.
I was thinking 26% chance, like one instance.
And when you do have to add these extra flood insurances on, I mean, how much are we talking here? Are we talking like $500 a year, or are we talking about $500 a month? Like, what are we looking at?
Let's take that same house that we said the premium was like, let's say $1,200 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it was in an AE zone, approximately, we know this is just variables, everybody's different, but what would you say that adds on monthly or annually?
So AE, it's interesting because between flood zone X flood policy and an AE policy, it's like a really big difference on premium.
Right, I want to know what that is.
So you're looking at like
don't be shy.
We'll take your same example. We'll say if it was like in a zone X, you're looking at same kind of deal, like $1,000 plus or minus. So we'll say like 800 to like 1,200.
Okay.
In zone AEs, that was in Houston, but like in Austin, you're still looking at like a few $1,000s, like and they're really expensive. Yeah.
So you're basically doubling your policy.
It's like
on average.
And a lot of people ask us, actually the most common question we get asked when it comes to flood is like, hey, why is like my flood insurance more than like my homeowner's premium? When like they think of it as like the home covers the entire house, like the flood covers the chance of a flood happening. Typically it's because, and there's a lot of different factors, but usually like flood underwriting, I guess like the flood underwriting process is very meticulous, and the things that like they ask from us and like the chances of that happening are, I guess if you put it in a silo of the flood, the percentage of flood happening in a certain area and like the amount of AE places compared to like homes where like you could build a new home if there's land, you can build, like you just have a wider pool with homes, whereas with floods, it's a smaller pool. So they gauge that risk really high. The nice part is though, you can always look and see like, depending on the lender, if they accept private flood, because sometimes like, especially with our private flood carriers, they're like really competitive and they don't ask for too much. So that is always nice, Let's
move on to something else. We've spent a lot on flood. If somebody wants to reach out to Sam and ask him about flood insurance, that can be a whole conversation by itself.
I'm going to call you after this, Sam, because I have more.
Definitely a range, because I've seen minimal cost too, and I'm sure it gets pretty high. as well.
Yeah, there's some flood policies that are cheap.
Yeah, let's go. Let's move on.
Yeah.
All right.
We only have 10 minutes.
Umbrella
JJ,
insurance.
can you read this for us?
So this is from our viewer in Alaska, right?
Yeah.
Can you get umbrella insurance if going through a broker who has placed home and car with different insurance companies? I've heard that policies for all the different things had to be with one vendor.
Okay. So welcome. Love that Alaska vibe. Definitely never been out there. Would love to go. That's an awesome question. That is like, I want to star that question. So that's completely false. You can actually get umbrella insurance through. So let's talk about so for example, what we do, right? So someone comes to us and they say, hey, Progressive, we tell them, hey, Progressive is the best for your autos, best rate, best coverage. Then maybe their home is covered. For example, one of our carriers, Homeowners of America, they specialize in homes. They're awesome. They're really good for new builds, by the way, Ian. They have some really good discounts for that. And just a really product that's just focused on that. They just write home insurance for us. And then your umbrella policy, we would, for example, would say, hey, Progressive is the best umbrella product that we have for your house and your cars and all your belongings. So that's what we're going to write that with. So yeah, the reason you've probably heard that, unfortunately, that's kind of a gray area for a lot of people, is a lot of insurance companies do try to bundle the home, auto, umbrella, all of your lines of business underneath their agency because it's easier for them. There may be some discounts. How big that discount is, that's going to depend based on the company. But you can definitely have an umbrella product with a company that doesn't do your home and auto.
Love it. Hey, JJ, you had a story you were talking about earlier. You want to share that real quick?
The squatter?
Yeah.
Okay, so I talked to my investment partner yesterday about this property with the squatter in it, and he said it was all good to purchase because you just throw home insurance on it, and we purchase it as investors and work on the eviction. And if he messes up the house, then it's insured. So that brings us to, how does home insurance, is there very specific things that it doesn't cover, or how does this fit in there? Because it's a resident, but not like an official tenant.
So this is it's essentially an investor policy covering the home, not like a tenant, right? Like they never left the house.
Yeah.
Which I've had that same thing where somebody bought the house and then the person that was living there just never left. That's a big thing happening across the United States.
It's not the owner. It was like some relationship with the owner that stuck around.
Yeah. No, that's a really unique situation. If I'm understanding it correctly, I think it'd be related to, I'm pretty sure it's going to be related to, so when you have insurance for investment homes, so there's a couple of types.
It's going to be an investment home. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they'll have a tenant living there. So typically that's going to be related to, there's actually a different product. It's like liability insurance that's specific to builder's risk policies.
Mm-hmm.
So builder's risk policies, you're right. Someone will say, hey, I had this happen this morning. They were like, hey, we have a investment property. We have a tenant that's living there. And we let them know that, hey, this is going to cover, essentially the builder's risk policy is going to cover the home itself. But there's a separate product that's actually really inexpensive comparative to what you're paying for insurance. US Assure, one of our carriers, they do builder's risk. We write them pretty much every single day at this point. They have a builder's risk premises liability product. And that product is really cool because you'll say, hey, let's say I bought an investment property. Someone came in and there was a liability claim. They tripped and fell. They got injured. And they call us and they're like, hey, this happened at your property. So that premises liability product is essentially going to help cover any liability claims inside or outside the home. And rate wise, I just did one this morning, so I can even tell you what it was. We did a 6-month builder's risk policy, and we did a 6-month premises liability, right? And the premises liability, $230. So essentially for a few months.
So for the annual premium, it added just $230
for a 6 month. Yeah, so this was for 6 months.
So
yeah. So
bucks,
annual, let's call it like, less than $500 a
less
year.
than 5, yeah.
So we
is
don't
what
get too stuck in the weeds. You basically go into the investor product of insurance products and then see what we could do to for a possible situation like that.
Double check, because having that in place, and actually some of our investors and their lenders that they've been using typically require that now for their closing process, because it builds some comfort for them, I'm sure. To be able to have that in place, and most investors really comfortable with that too.
I love this question. That's funny.
That's a good one, Mark.
Mark Hayes says, if the community doesn't end in creek but ends in ranch, do we have to worry about stampedes? The answer is absolutely. You got to keep that in mind. That's a good one.
Beautiful cows out there roaming around.
I love it. And we have a lot of them. We have a lot of longhorns. People don't know, but they're real. Sam, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Short-term rentals. I have a lot of people that have asked, like, can they buy something and then use it as a short-term rental? How does that work for insurance?
Yeah. So short-term,
like Airbnb or VRBO or anybody who's listening and interested in that, those fall under short-term rentals for homes.
Yeah, that's a great question. So short-term rentals, that's really going to be, I hate to sound like this, but it's going to be carrier specific. So all of our carriers, they've actually kind of tightened down on that piece a little bit, because a lot of people will, like, for example, right, same investment home, they'll have an investment home and then they're actually using it as an Airbnb, but our carrier doesn't allow for that. And then they'll be hit with a fine. Yeah. So
they'll be hit with a fine.
They'll be hit with a fine.
From the insurance company?
From the insurance company.
Boom. Look at that.
So definitely do not try to do, and some people will, for lack of a better word, like, they'll get away with it because it'll be so short. It'll be like 2 weeks and no one really knows. But if it's been going on for, like 6 months and they get caught red-handed, it's kind of a problem. So that is something some of our carriers accept that. It's just before we write that policy, that's something we just have to disclose. And then they have an underwriting team that will tell us, like, hey, this is acceptable.
That's a tricky one. Shouldn't the renter get renter's insurance, or is that not I haven't looked at STR.
I always ask my renter, like, if I'm supporting an investor, I always make sure that if there's a tenant coming in for the lease listing, that they get renter's insurance. That's absolutely a requirement.
I don't know how short-term rentals, if that's like a thing. I haven't really paid attention to that market.
Short-term rentals aren't normal leases.
Yeah.
That's kind of right. They're only there.
It's a
like
short
Airbnb,
one.
You're not getting a lease. The agreements with Airbnb, it's all kind of like free market capitalism. That's kind of like the whole idea behind it. There are rules in place, but that's now insurance as a host through Airbnb, and maybe anyway. So we've got a couple minutes left. So why don't we go around round table and ask any questions for Sam or others, and start with Liberty, because you're awesome, Liberty.
Well, I am just blown away, Sam. I think you have a plethora of knowledge that I will be definitely tapping into beyond this, because my questions, I can't fit them in 60 seconds. So
I know.
You need to drop your email in the chat.
Yeah.
So that we can continue on this conversation. But thank you for being here. This is knowledgeable. This is a gray area for a lot of people.
It is. I don't think a lot of people get that, which is what makes it so exciting. How about you, JJ?
I don't know whether to question it, but I will just direct people to Sam, because the thing about insurance is, like, people are like looking how to pay less, and then is it worth it to pay more? Unless maybe you could talk about that at your closing. But that's definitely why you call your insurance agent, because it could be expensive to be cheap. And if you think about that, and your insurance agent,
to be cheap. Love that.
figure out.
I did just think of something. So every time you go to Best Buy and you buy something and they're like, do you want to purchase that extra care for $14? And I'm like, no, I'm not that kind of person. I will take on the risk.
But it's all relative, right?
A house is a little bit different than a USB cable. Right?
It is. If you're buying insurance for a USB cable, just give me that money. Really? Hey, Sam, this is a question for you. Jennifer asks, how difficult is it to arrange insurance and property taxes without being required to use the escrow?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question, Jennifer. So that's going to depend on. It's typically going to depend on your mortgage lender and their requirements. I know depending on the mortgage lender, some of them have a little bit of flexibility with that. For example, if they just had, they were okay with you paying the insurance in full prior to closing, then of course you wouldn't have to escrow that piece. And then depending on, other lenders are a little bit tighter on us, and they want that to be rolled into that one lump sum payment with your taxes, insurance, and your mortgage all bundled.
I think to help a little bit is some of it's going to have to do with your position. If you're getting a FHA loan, right, versus if you're putting 50% down on a conventional, those are very different scenarios. And so everybody, some lenders are going to look at it if it's a big bank versus a local lender, all sorts of things. Yeah. So she asks, can she have a discussion with her broker?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's the answer.
And that leads me to say too, when you are in the process of purchasing a home, do not forget to call Sam prior to closing. Call him as soon as you go under contract and get this going, because you don't want to call 2 days before and have him rush on it.
Yeah. Literally, thanks so much for bringing that up, because that's one of the biggest things we get asked. Honestly, every single morning I get asked the same thing, and it's awesome. But people, a lot of people, I think, wait until the closing table, and then they, we make it happen. So if you call us the day before, we will do it. But you can actually, we can actually help issue out the policy up to 30 days in advance with pretty much all of our carriers. So that way, you can check insurance off that bucket list, get on with all the fun part of, buying your first piece of real estate or, another piece of real estate. That's always, and you want to have that relationship, with these guys, with your real estate agents, right? Because they know the market, they're helping you find the best deal, they're making sure everything goes smoothly. The last thing you want is 24 hours before closing, call us, get the policy all set up, and then, puts a little stress on your lender, and I'm sure your realtor a little bit too. So we just try to really help, alleviate that stress. Really flexible when it comes to timing. So we know a lot of guys tuning in. You guys are in, different areas, different places. We're available all the time for everybody. So
let me leave with. So I'm going to leave with a question, and it's if you're I guess the question to you. We have people that are shopping during the process, right? So if you're buying a house and you are talking to your mortgage lender and your realtor, if you don't mention insurance, it is automatically chosen. And that's huge, right? If somebody is picking that insurance provider, and generally it's going to be your lender. And so that's what I'm gonna say. Just pay attention to that, because that really can affect your monthly payment, because generally in Texas, it's going to be rolled into that monthly payment. And like Sam said, the premiums can vary considerably. So make sure you're checking with your agent as soon as you go under contract, or even before, to look at what some of the insurance costs for these houses are going to be. That's it for me, and I'm going to leave it to you, Sam. To finish out our discussion.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, guys, for being here. Home insurance is something really near and dear to us, our agency. I was telling all these guys before, in another world, I was actually going to do interior design. So we're actually genuinely passionate about real estate, and making sure you have, an awesome experience. We're cool people. You can really reach out to us for anything. And we do, I want to leave with one thing that I think really kind of sets us apart and everybody here. We really try to go above and beyond for every single person. So for example, I had a home closing this morning, and we finished everything up. We're talking, same person was looking for a local mechanic. I had one of my friends literally give him a call within an hour and be like, hey, he's really cool. Can you make sure you take care of him? And then he called me after he got, all his stuff done with his car, and was like, that's really cool. So a big thing for us is anyone that we know that can help you out in any way. We're an open book. We really want you to know that we're there for you. You want to call us at 9 o'clock to talk about, your kid's soccer game, like we want to hear about it. I used to play soccer too, so
You opened up that door, y'all.
yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sam.
All right.
We'll see
Thank
everybody
you.
next Friday
Awesome.
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
Real Estate Lab.
Thanks for tuning
Thank you
in,
so
y'all.
much.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thanks. Have a good one.